Here. All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar, Key Insights on Threat Intelligence and XDR, Every Business Needs to Know. My name is Erin Haynes, and I run the marketing for Samurai XDR here at NTT Security Holdings. Today's webinar is hosted by Jeremy Nichols, the Director of Global Threat Intelligence Center at NTT Security Holdings, and Paul Asagi, the Senior Director of Product Management for Samurai XDR, who will introduce themselves here momentarily. The webinar itself will be about 30 to 45 minutes, and we will have a Q&A session at the end to answer any questions that you may have. And we're also going to record this webinar for those who can't attend or may need to drop off, and we will have the recording on our website once the webinar is over, and we will send that link out as well. With all that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Paul.
Hi and welcome. Thanks, Erin, for the introduction. Today we'll be covering insights from our GTI report, but with a focus on SMBs. Then moving into what we believe is our differentiator in the market, our threat intelligence. Not just about the data, but about the people and the processes behind the scenes. If you ever wanted to start your own TI capability, the insights that you will get from today from Jeremy may assist you. Okay, so now for some stats. If you thought as an SMB, why would I be a target? Think again. As you can see, the stats showing a staggering 73% of SMBs experienced a cyber attack or a breach. Just under 3/4 of our survey shows that. That's quite a large number. Add to this, 82% were made up of ransomware attacks. And as we all know, ransomware is mostly indiscriminate, with the recovery being costly at $3 million on average. So for those affected SMBs, there is a high proportion that they will close their doors after 12 months after a major breach, which is quite sad. To me, it's of no surprise then that only 70% of SMBs have cyber insurance. Like as an SMB, you're concerned more about keeping your business afloat, less about insurance premiums that you might have to pay. And while cyber insurance may help you get back on your feet, it only helps you once you become a victim. So don't get me wrong, I'm not against cyber insurance. It's just where do you put your money as an SMB? And it sort of shows, the stats show that you probably should be looking somewhere elsewhere. So shouldn't we be trying to create more cyber threat resilience so that insurance ends up being a nice to have? If you do get funding for cyber, I'd suggest you spend it on increasing awareness, education, patching and monitoring. If you can afford it, potentially look at an MDR. It may be a wise investment, but if you can't afford solutions like an MDR, where outcome-based third party helps you in this area, you could look at other solutions like XDR and many others, just so you can get ahead of the game. Okay. So yes, you're all at risk to these threats and more. Ransomware always gets a seat at the table, especially for SMBs. These days, attackers are more likely to be more like a smash and grab. For example, they get the assets exfiltrated as fast as possible, then extort you for money. This is a change opposed to being, like in the past, stealthy, long-term, persistent, or even today they don't even bother with encryption. That alone may take too long. So it's quick. And then you have man in the middle. Sure, these threats exist, but they are harder to identify and block. I'd recommend focusing on the top row if you had to prioritize. But luckily, our industry recognizes the need to change and adapt to the wave of threats coming in on all angles and in increasing velocity, hence the emergence of tools like XDR. So what is threat intelligence? It's detailed, actionable information that's used to prevent and combat cybersecurity threats targeting an organization. It's created by gathering the raw data from various sources, such as your security feeds, forums, dark web monitoring, and malware analysis. Then we take that in analytics and that contextual understanding and apply it to help identify and, importantly, prioritize the potential threats. We'll hear more from Jeremy on this important capability that we've built here in NTT. From an XDR perspective, what is it? Well, it's a cloud-delivered tool that integrates and correlates data across multiple security layers, such as endpoint devices, network applications, and cloud environments. It aims to provide more of a comprehensive and unified view of potential threats and incidents than traditional security controls that operate in silos. XDR combines all of these signals to create a higher fidelity or a stronger signal that creates that contextual awareness and allows you to respond with confidence at speed. So from the front end, as Gartner like to say, the front end of XDR, you've got a few key elements. These include the integrations, such as your EDRs, cloud, network, identity, and email, mainly using API, but also some legacy transports. And in the back end, you have these other elements, which include detection and response, using your AI and ML, of course, threat intelligence, all used to detect threats and ultimately facilitate the incident response process with tools that are integrated into the XDR, not outside. Then there is the automation, a subset of SOAR that's aligned to threat detection and response. It's really the R in XDR. And of course, there are other elements, including analytics. So XDR empowers these small teams and SMBs due to its cost effectiveness and ease of use. With an XDR solution, businesses can be up and running in minutes. And of course, there are automations and other bits and pieces that may be specific to your business. But the good news is, unlike its predecessors, like SIEM, you don't need to worry about creating and maintaining some complex rules and the plumbing of various, threat intelligence sources. And being cloud, most XDRs have adopted that pricing-based consumption models that include, nominal amounts of storage retention, so you can perform things like retrospective hunts and searches. And we all remember the SolarWinds issue. If we only had capability to do a look back, we may have all been in a better place. So let me sort of caveat my, the comments around SIEM. We all love SIEM, like every other data source. XDRs don't suggest to replace your SIEM, not initially anyway, but leverage and use the wealth of content in the processes and the content to leverage things like remote hunting. So let's talk a little bit more about threat intelligence and why we think it's NTT's value proposition. So most cyber threat practitioners know the benefit of threat intelligence and how to access it. This includes your open source and your commercial sources. Open source is free and does contain great content, but also maybe some content that you should be careful about using and not taken as gospel, in that it may require additional validation. Then you have your commercial sources. They'll be of higher credibility and accuracy, but they also come with a higher price tag, probably not within reach of many SMBs out there today. Then there's the restricted information sharing groups. These have even higher fidelity, but are mainly accessible in a give to get model. If you don't have something to offer in a unique way, it's likely you're not going to get access to the information. And we're fortunate enough to be part of these information sharing groups here at NTT. Then there is what only we in NTT have access to. That is threat intelligence developed from our clients and our tier 1 global internet backbone we call GIN. With GIN, we have 40% coverage of the internet. This vast amount of data, which is over 10 terabytes a day, is analysed continuously to develop some unique indicators not seen by any other vendor or company. This alone, we believe, is a real differentiator to our platform. We don't sell our TI, but the good news is that it is accessible via our platform, Samurai XDR. And with that, I'll hand over to Jeremy to take us into the GTI report and talk about how the amazing things that Jeremy's team does in our Global Threat Intelligence Center. Over to you, Jeremy.
Awesome. Thanks for the intro, Aaron, and thank you, Paul. So first up, we'll talk about some of the insights from our 2024 Global Threat Intelligence Report. That is available for download from the website, security.ntt. There's a lot of great additional information that we won't have time or space with PowerPoint to dive into today. All of the data that's covered in there is from calendar year 2023. And what we looked at this year is our theme was kind of the perfect storm, right? I think a lot of organizations are starting to see their budgets stagnate or shrink. Organizations are facing more incidents and more severe incidents. At the same time, professionals are kind of lagging in keeping up. They're stressed to keep pace with more job responsibilities, more job complexity, wearing additional hats. And we've long talked about the skills gap in cybersecurity, and it continues to grow every year. So we started to see rising fatigue and burnout from these professionals that have, kind of increasingly reliant on an expanding tool set it's really becoming borderline unmanageable, right? So that starts to lead into analysts and administrators missing key details, failing to follow up efficiently, and it really opens the door for those more severe incidents. So with that, as we do every year, we take a look at the most attacked sectors based on our customer data. Not very much change this year, a lot of carryover from prior years, right? So manufacturing, technology, transport and distribution remained in the top 5. So we continue to see those attacks against critical infrastructure and supply chains prioritized by adversaries, and they face some of the most significant risk. Manufacturing was moved into the top slot this year, which was also the top from a ransomware victim perspective, which we'll talk about a little more later. We did see a surge in attacks for entities that are manufacturing components for the energy and mining industry specifically, as well as construction organizations. On the technology side, we did see that dip down to number 2 this year from number 1, but it did still make up over 20% of the attacks that we observed last year. And in particular, that was targeting technology and service providers. So any advantage to get in from that supply chain perspective where you can potentially increase the victim count by pivoting to different tenants, different customer environments. And then as we see almost every year, finance within the top 5, always a prime target for financially motivated threat actors. On the malware side, we took a little bit different approach this year. We focused on the capability or the technique of the malware and our detections itself, as opposed to just listing the top 5 or 10 malware families that we observed. I think in some cases, folks have a tendency to hyper-focus on the specific malware or the specific variant, want to make sure they have protections in place for those. That's great, but if we do that, we leave kind of a lot on the floor, right? So we want to make sure that we're actually focused on the TTPs, those tactics, techniques, and procedures, as opposed to specific IOCs or specific malware themselves. We do see this continue to evolve, every year, right? In better efficiency to gain initial access, evade detection, maintain persistence within the environment, especially when it comes to Trojans and info stealers, collecting that data, providing that remote access. They continue to be major players here. We did see some of the ransomware detections decrease this year. And as Paul kind of noted, right, there was a shift to focus on speed. So get in, exfiltrate the data, get out, leverage that for that double extortion, right? Try to, the threat of that leak of that data to obtain payment versus actually encrypting and trying to force it that way. So continued evolution of those behaviors. And then we continue to see malware modularized, right? So no longer is one malicious binary, one function, right? Everything has a lot of different modular capabilities, allowing different vectors for C2, different vectors for that initial access and persistence, and ways to evade detection or prevention techniques. So it's really important here, I think, as kind of the main takeaway, right, is teams need to be prepared to defend and hunt against these different behaviors and TTPs, as opposed to hyper-focusing on, the malicious hashes and artifacts themselves. That is important. Obviously, those protections need to be in place from a tactical perspective, but from more technical and operational, we need to make sure we're focusing a little bit higher as opposed to just focusing on specific malware, because a lot of this is, it doesn't matter what sector you're in, what geography you are in, the exposures is always going to be there for a lot of this malware, right? On the vulnerability side, we looked at a couple different aspects here, both vulnerability and exploitation. As always, we see a continued increase in CVEs, or common vulnerability exposures, announced every single year. Some of that is just the growth of the market, the growth of software, hardware, and additional vendors that are out there. So we're going to continue to see that increase. But we've also seen with bug bounty programs and things like that, kind of that continued acceleration of the announcements every year. So that vulnerability intelligence is kind of an I guess underrated aspect of threat intelligence as well, right? Teams do struggle with patch management, even though it's a very simple concept at its core. It feels like this is one of our recommendations every single year, right? A small gap in that process can leave your attack surface in your organization exposed. We as the defenders and protectors need to be right every single time, whereas the attacker only has to be right once. A lot of the CVEs covered last year and a lot of the known exploited vulnerabilities last year really fall in line with the vendors that have the biggest market share and the highest reputation, right? That's kind of been the theme for many years. It was always is Microsoft really the most vulnerable, or is it just because they're the most used? And it's definitely a little of both. A lot of those popular vendors, as well as software as a service and remote management tools, are becoming those key targets for adversaries looking to maximize their victim count with that exploitation. So especially if you can get in, like I said earlier, pivot to multiple customer environments from one breach, then that's always going to be a more appealing target than going organization by organization. We'll talk about a little of that, kind of big game hunting as well from the ransomware perspective. A lot of the gaps here we see, with COVID, a lot of organizations had to very quickly shift to a remote workforce or a hybrid workforce, potentially stand up additional remote access or VPN tools to enable their employees to work remotely. With that, kind of came a gap in this process, right? So improper asset discovery and management, both internally and externally, organizations struggling to keep that inventory up to date. Patch prioritization and testing, improperly assessing that supply chain, especially as we've broken out and now are starting to return to the office. A lot of those processes weren't as mature as maybe we believe they were, and so that shakeup really caused some additional gaps in this area. So it's definitely important. Look at different ways that you can maximize insights from threat intelligence to aid that patch management and that patch prioritization process. If nothing else, there's tools available to find, what CVEs are actively being exploited. That's a perfect starting point, right? If you're struggling with the testing and prioritization process. As we look at some of the ransomware insights, so ransomware had a banner year in 2023, right, with the most victims we've ever seen disclosed, as well as the highest amount of payments according to the report from Chain Analysis, with over 1 billion being paid to ransomware operators and gangs. Some of this was a lot of the same, right? United States in manufacturing topped the charts this year, as they have pretty much every year. In terms of the most victims announced or publicly disclosed on the kind of the shame sites, the double extortion sites. The top targets that we're seeing are generally organizations that need that near perfect uptime, or they can't handle that disruption to their business, right? So manufacturing, online technology and retail, service providers, financial organizations, healthcare organizations, where there's literally lives hanging in the balance. Those targets have started to shift. Historically, a lot of those industries were considered off limits, especially with the ransomware as a service operator, right? So aviation, healthcare, nonprofits, energy industry, those were typically not allowed to be attacked. And in the ransomware as a service model, if they were, that affiliate would generally get kicked out. The organization would get a decryption key for free. We've started to see that actually shift, where that's really no longer the case, right? We're seeing more and more of those organizations actually targeted here. On the big game hunting side, we did see last year several big examples of this, right? So Clop with the Move It vulnerability, that 0-day, really a lot larger scale operations. Over 50% of those victims had over 1,000 employees, whereas in most cases, we actually see SMBs facing some of the most risk, with over 50% of the victims having less than 200 employees, and 2/3, I think right around 68% of those having less than 500. So smaller organizations really struggle with this, even if that ransom is smaller. As Paul said, with some of those payments, some of that, some of those organizations, a lot of them actually are going out of business within 6 months to a year. So we need to make sure we're protected against these threats, have a plan in place. We started to see a few of the ransomware operators actually weaponize some of the federal agencies and industry regulations to increase the likelihood of payment, right? So in the United States, you have to file an SEC claim if you've had a breach, kind of threatening the organization. Hey, do you think they'd want to know about this? If you don't pay the ransom, we're going to tell them. It's going to go public that you were breached. Same thing with things like GDPR in Europe, right? You're going to face a massive fine one way or the other. Just pay us. We won't list or disclose your data, and that'll be cheaper than the fine you're going to face for GDPR. So trying to actually leverage those regulations to force payment out of the victim. And then this last year, we also saw a lot of groups start to kind of cross moral lines in addition to the criminal ones they were already crossing with these types of operations, right? So a couple groups actually trying to extort the patients and customers of the organization they breached. So breach an organization and not just demanding a ransom from them, but actually trying to extort from the data that you collected their patients, their students, their customers. And then we've seen a couple groups actually threaten to release, like sensitive medical photos or records of patients if ransoms aren't paid. So really taking that a step beyond where it's not just the financial gain of the cybercrime, but we're actually, really crossing those moral lines and targeting individuals directly versus just the organization. It's kind of that punishment for not having the security in place. So it's having a much bigger impact on individuals as opposed to just organizations as it has in the past. Excuse me. And as I mentioned, that the report is available for download on the security.ntt website. There's quite a bit of additional information in there. Definitely go download that, check it out. Some predictions, some additional guidance and recommendations in there for SMBs as well. So with that, then we'll dive into a little bit more about, what is the Global Threat Intelligence Center? How are we producing that intelligence that our XDR customers do benefit from? So GTIC, or the Global Threat Intelligence Center, we're a dedicated research team that's responsible for the threat intelligence research and production, detection engineering, and some of the intelligence publications like our annual report or our quarterly infographics. We also manage and maintain the threat intel platform, as well as the research and analysis environment. So really the end-to-end intelligence capability here for this production of the intelligence we'll talk about in a bit. We're also responsible for maintaining all of those partnerships and alliances within those intel sharing communities that Paul had mentioned, right? Something that we as NTT have access to because of our size or reputation, or our ability to produce some of those unique insights to share with other members. And then we do benefit greatly from the internal collaboration across NTT Group and within NTT Security as well, right? So the research team, R&D, innovation, our SOCs, that helps us balance, the bigger, longer running research with that boots on the ground view of what other operating companies or other teams are seeing, whether it's across our customers or internally. So from a threat intelligence production perspective, a lot of this you've probably seen or seen very similar, right? So collect the intelligence, whether that's feeds, open source, commercial, those partner alliance feeds, both structured and unstructured formats. So, regardless of what type of intelligence or how it's coming in, that's all collected into the same place, normalized, deduplicated, aggregated. And we go through the processing and exploitation, enriching that, tagging that, everything industry standardized here, right? So we leverage MITRE ATT&CK, the traffic light protocol, NATO Admiralty, all of that, ensuring we have a standard nomenclature that our customers can understand, especially as it compares to other industry reports and public reporting on different threats. All of that is analyzed and produced from our team and then integrated back and shared across the different teams within NTT, as well as the platform and the frameworks themselves, which I'll touch on a little later. As Paul had noted, one of the biggest pieces, which we'll talk about in depth, is the GIN data, or that tier one internet backbone, where we have incredible visibility across a lot of the traffic that's happening beyond our borders at NTT, right? That provides some really unique insights, and we'll dive into a couple examples of how we can leverage that, kind of real time moving forward for monitoring, as well as retroactively in the case of when we learn of new intel, or we learn of a breach that may have already happened in the past. And then tremendous value from the sharing alliances. There's a lot of great industry collaboration there between peers within the industry and other organizations that give us good insights of what they're seeing, what their clients are seeing, and sharing that within a structured format that we can leverage to benefit our customers as well. Good insights from our technology partners, whether that's enrichment, facilitating our research, or doing deeper dives on different threats that we're observing. And with that backbone data, we'll touch on it a bit more, but we have seen some great success. We've been involved with some disruption and takedown efforts with law enforcement and others as a result of the insights that were provided there, right? So being able to detect hosts before they're actually being leveraged by malicious adversaries, and in many cases actually detecting them up to weeks before they're actually flagged as malicious by many standardized tools. So we keep mentioning that tier one backbone, right? What is that? It's essentially the internet flow data from us as an ISP that we can gain additional insights into, leveraging the intelligence we already have as kind of seed data or initial data for monitoring. And then that produces insights that we'll touch on a bit more to actually be able to produce additional indicators of compromise, track infrastructure, track and profile different behaviors, right? So on the screen is just a couple different visualizations. On the left there, that was actually mapping out some different C2 nodes of a popular disruption effort we were involved in a few years back, in terms of the overall communication, not just between the C2 and the victim, but actually going several layers deep and being able to trace that back up to who's actually logging into the C2 or those admin panels, right? And then pulling that data back and actually enriching it, looking at the correlation between the hosts involved, their ASN, the attributes of those actual hosts that are involved in the communication. And that really helps form kind of a cohesive picture of that malicious infrastructure, right? Including even when it's being staged before it's actually been leveraged within an attack in some cases. And as you can see on the right there, it does allow us to go kind of multiple layers deep, right? So we have the known that we start with that profiling, we can identify new unknown, and then as well as leverage insights from other feeds or from what our SOC is seeing to continue to build and map that out further. And then based on that flow data, we can start to actually kind of profile the behaviors of, whether it's malware infrastructure or threat actor infrastructure, to get additional insights into those behaviors, right? When did a particular campaign begin, beyond when we initially saw it, right? If it comes from a SOC incident or a honeypot sighting, has it actually been happening, much longer? And this just happened to be the first time one of our customers saw it. Do the adversaries appear to have any kind of geographic or time zone preference, right? What is the frequency of the attacks or the frequency of their activity behind it? As well as, from a SOC or feed perspective, we may only see a small subset of the targets or the victims, right? So leveraging that backbone, we can actually see from that, that attacker IP or that attacking infrastructure, were they targeting potentially other organizations, other regions, other victims that were previously unknown. And then in addition to that kind of moving forward monitoring or quick checks into what we might know about certain hosts, we also have the ability to retro hunt that, right? Take that same analysis, but conduct it historically about attacks that have happened in the past, or maybe it was just announced, a different vendor was tracking something that we hadn't seen. We can actually look back and say, okay, you said this started 2 weeks ago. We actually, potentially saw it even earlier, and collaborate in instances like that, right? So especially useful when details emerge about a previously unknown campaign, or in the case of a zero-day or mass exploitation campaign, right? Are there any other unreported victims that previously weren't known by other vendors or by us as NTT Security Holdings? Once we enrich that net flow data, right, was there a specific focus targeting a certain country, a certain geography, or a certain industry or subset of industries? And then did that begin before it was actually believed to have begun, right? Is it something that we actually have some additional visibility into from a perspective even earlier than what's been announced? So really, really powerful insights, especially on the malware and the malicious infrastructure perspective, to actually track that out, map those communications out, and get some visibility into what's going on kind of behind the scenes before it reaches the customer network. And that helps us produce some of those indicators, some of that additional context and enrichment within the platform that can help from an XDR perspective. And I'll touch on that a little more here. So we talked about a lot of those insights, a lot of the partnerships, the collaboration, the different technologies we're leveraging. So why do you care, right? Why is that of interest? Why does that matter for an XDR customer? Well, ultimately, the product of all that research and intelligence is made available to the customers within XDR, benefiting from the partnerships and alliances, the collaboration within NTT Security Holdings and within NTT Group, as well as all of the NTT's significant investment in innovation and R&D, right? So you can see here on the screen there's a couple flows, but not just the collaboration between the SOC and the intelligence that they're producing, but also the wider NTT Group, that backbone data, the NTT Security Holdings GTIC. All of that is shared and collaborated on within the frameworks that we've got in place. And think of that a little beyond, right? That's not just sharing of the IOCs. Like, we've got a threat list that we're sharing the bad IPs, right? That's the overall artifacts of all of this tracking that we're doing across the teams, right? So the indicators of compromise, the artifacts, the malware, the PCAPs, and all of that supports the training and testing to validate coverage, right? So it's not just hey, we found a new IP. If we see this in a customer's environment, make sure we raise an incident, right? It's actually profiling. Here's the flow of that attack, or here's how that malware is actually behaving at a host and a network level. Let's ensure our detection engine and its secret sauce can actually flag that. And all of that's available to our Samurai XDR customers, right? So benefiting from that enhanced threat detection, the faster response time, the reduced false positives, all of that made available through that, both within the engine as well as through that, as Paul said, that XDR front end, right? All of that, the GIN data, the partner alliance data, deep dark web, everything benefits the customer there. So all of that work that goes into producing the insights, as well as producing our report and the indicators, or excuse me, the infographics, that's all made available within Samurai XDR. So with that, I'll hand it back over to you, Erin.
All right, thank you, Jeremy. Okay. Before we move on to our Q&A session, I just wanted to direct everyone over to samurai.security.ntt, where you can sign up for a 30-day free trial and get a cup of coffee on us when you get your telemetry connected. And also, we have another webinar coming up next week, The Future of MSP Security, Embracing XDR Solutions. So please get that checked out and register for that webinar that's up and coming. And now we are going to move on to some questions. So Paul and Jeremy, the first question we have is, does seeing 40% of the internet daily really make a difference in XDR outcomes?
Yeah, I can take that one, Paul. So yeah, I mean, I think we touched on a handful of those benefits, obviously with the different profiling and behavior we can do. And that's really more of a benefit to us at NTT Security Holdings, right? To support our research, to support our intelligence production. Where that starts to make the difference for the XDR outcomes and the XDR customers is that continuous training into that secret sauce, right? The detection engine, all of the outcomes of that research helps produce the additional indicators, the additional TTPs and behaviors as well as the artifacts that are leveraged for that training of the engine itself, and testing of that, right? So all of the outcome of that visibility, the threat actor tracking, the malware tracking, the infrastructure and campaign tracking, ultimately does benefit from the the improved threat detection, the increased coverage, the reduced false positives. So a lot of benefit of the intelligence we're producing is passed along to customers there.
Great. Okay, here's another one. My company uses identity management, antivirus software, and firewalls. Do I really need an XDR?
Yeah, I'll take this one. I think this is probably a product question. Thanks, Jeremy and Aaron. Unbiased, yes, you do. I'll provide some clarification as to why I think you do need an XDR, or you need something to bring it together. So you have a lot of great ingredients, but you're still not baking that cake. Bad metaphor, good metaphor, I'm not really sure, but you need to bring it together. So you have the signals from each of these types of software. In this case, it's antivirus, identity, and firewalls, all providing you with different signals and different threats. In their own right, yeah, they're really, really important, really interesting. An XDR wants to consume those. It wants to highlight those, prioritize those, allow you to work on those. But what XDR does give you is gives you the context when combined with the other signals. So, as an example, did I see that attack path come through my firewall, land in my environment, and then on a desktop? Or did it come via some other channel? Is the attack identified in my identity management system? Were there brute force attempts before even an antivirus was flagged? You really want to know how the attacker got where they got, what was tripped along the way in terms of your sensors in your network, and you want to bring that together. And bringing it together creates those breadcrumbs or stitching all of those events together to see the timeline. Because as a defender, you want to not only know what happened, you want to know how it happened. And XDR gives you the ability to have that visualization, but also have the machine learning and AI put it all together for you so that you can respond faster. It's no good in seeing one antivirus ping on your console and then acting fast to do something about it when really there's a lot more going on. I think having the other inputs, such as the failed logins and also maybe some IPS signatures on your firewall trigger, gives you that confidence that no, this is not a false positive. All of these flags went off, and therefore the priority has increased. And the XDR will do that. It will help you prioritize all of those sometimes seemingly noisy events into something that is more tangible and something you need to respond to. So, an answer, but yes, you do. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul.
No worries.
All right, here's another one. Is there a proactive way to reduce vulnerabilities for the increased attacks you mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately the solution there is more security by design, right? And there's some efforts both from a government legislative perspective, as well as an industry perspective on encouraging and hopefully kind of forcing vendors to have more secure practices up front to reduce the amount of vulnerabilities that are ever even discovered and announced, right? But that's a kind of utopian future, right? We're always going to have some vulnerabilities that exist. There's always going to be 0 days that are discovered in software, right? So the most important thing is making sure, number one, up front, you understand what your attack surface is and what your exposure is, right? So what's externally facing, what assets am I running, and understanding that inventory up front, right? Because you can't patch what you don't know exists. From there, ensuring everything is as secure as possible up front, disable any unneeded features, disable any unneeded integrations, restrict administrative access, all the typical kind of security hardening pieces. And then from the vulnerability intelligence side, just ensuring that you have a proper prioritization plan in place, right? In a lot of environments, you can't just install a patch the second it's released, right? You need to test that, make sure it's not going to break any features for your users, for your own functionality. So there's different tools that are available. We always heavily reference the CISA known exploited vulnerability catalog. That's a really great resource that lets organizations know what CVEs have been announced that are actively being exploited by threat actors or malware. So if nothing else, that's a good starting point, right? It's not going to be 100% accurate. It's not going to cover everything, but just a kind of another input to help that prioritization process, right? Ensure you've got key vendors in place. If there's certain vulnerabilities or certain software that's out there, reduce your exposure. If it doesn't need to be accessible, make sure it's not. If you're not using it in your environment, make sure it's not allowed, right? Block it entirely if and where you can. So definitely some different techniques. You'll never get to that full preventative mode as long as something is exposed to the internet, which at this day and age, every organization is going to have something. So it's just key to make sure you understand what is there, what's exposed, and stay on top of it as quickly and best as you're able to.
Perfect. Thank you, Jeremy. All right. I haven't seen any more questions come through after those three. So I think if that's all the questions, we will wrap up. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We're very glad and excited that you did, and we hope you found this information to be useful. We will be sending out the link to our webinar and the PowerPoint deck, and so be on the lookout for that. And thank you again. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining.
Yeah.
Thanks, Paul and Jeremy.
No worries.
Thank you, Aaron.
Bye, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.